Commissioner at the Chicago Department of Public Health. Today is Tuesday, July 6, 2021. I hope folks had a good 4th of July celebration and that you gathered to celebrate with vaccinated friends and family. Or if there were people who were not vaccinated, that you did what you could to be out of doors and that you hopefully talked a lot about vaccine, because I certainly talked a lot about vaccine during my 4th of July celebrations with people, mostly about actually how well the vaccine has been performing in the real world, and I've continued to just be grateful for that all three of the vaccines we're using here in the U.S. continue to perform so well in terms of helping prevent hospitalizations and deaths, that they've continued at this point to work against all known variants. The news really is better than I had anticipated it would be with these vaccines, and so I feel grateful for that and was certainly happy to have the chance to gather with friends, family during my 4th of July celebrations. So as always, this is your chance to get your COVID questions answered. You can put them directly into the box below. You can also use the hashtag AskDrArwady on either Facebook or on Twitter, and we will get to your questions in just a minute. In the meantime, as always, we will start with a look at our data dashboard, chi.gov/COVID-, and if we pull it up, we see that the news continues to be good. We are averaging 36 cases a day here in Chicago. You can see that's exactly where we were a week ago, and 36 cases a day is very good. Where you think about our main goal is to keep under 200 cases, definitely under 400, and we had days here with as many as 3,500 cases a day. This is really very good. We're averaging between 4 and 5 hospitalizations a day, also very good. Both of these, we're going to have to, I think, recalculate these daily rates per 100,000, because when they're 1 or under 1, we've been thinking about using decimals to be able to be clear on that. But you can see in the graphs here too, the lowest that they've been. Deaths are the lowest they've been, between 0 and 1 now. And I will note, and maybe I'll show you this in a second, we've now had some days here in Chicago with no COVID deaths, and it had been 9 months since we'd had a day without COVID deaths. Let's look at that in just a second. And we're doing about 4,500 vaccines a day. That's our daily average. So we see that dip a little bit typically around holidays. We do have more than half of Chicagoans of all ages have completed their vaccine series, and 56% have at least 1 dose. Obviously, that's better if you just limit it to the adults. We had some drop in testing. We're doing about 5,600 a day. Some of that, though, is certainly related to 4th of July. We always see a drop like this around any of our longer holidays. And in that setting, with the tests going down, our positivity is up to 0.8%, because remember, positivity is positive tests divided by all tests. So if your number of tests has gone down, your positivity will go up, but it's less than 1%. I am not concerned about that at this point. Let's take a quick look just to show you some of this deaths if you're interested and you want to follow this. So this is, on this right here, you can click on cases and see all the details: cases, hospitalizations, deaths. You can look by age, you can look by gender, you can look race, ethnicity. You can look at the daily average or the cumulative total. And here with this slider, you can say, I only want to see it for the last 2 months, or move where you want to see. So if we just switch to deaths here, first of all, if we kind of zoom this out here, you can see actually where this drops all the way down, we had no deaths. And so where we highlight here, you can see, like on September 11th, there were 5 deaths. Actually, September 12th, there were no deaths. And then here, September 13th, there were 3 deaths. And so we had way back at the beginning, our first death in Chicago was March 16, 2020, if I remember correctly. And then March, internet's being a little slow here. March 20 was the last day. See this? We had no deaths. Our first death was the 16th. March 20th, we didn't have any deaths from COVID. And then we've had Chicago residents dying from COVID all the days through here. Then we had 2 days last September. The last being September, it looks like 17th, 18th, somewhere in there. We'll post the exact details. Yeah, it looks like September 17th. So we'd had 2 days with no COVID tests last September, and then we went 9 months COVID deaths, COVID deaths, COVID deaths. And then finally, here, starting in late June, June 20th was that first day with no COVID deaths in Chicago. And then at this point, we've had none reported also, the 23rd, the 24th. Sometimes there can be a little delay in them coming in, but the fact that we're averaging just between 0 and 1 cases a day, and you can go back if you want to use this slider, and if you want to just limit it to the last couple of months, you can look at the specific days, but I just wanted to give you a sense of this. We've gone 15 months here, and there had been 3 days total without a COVID death. And then we've had at least 3 days, just in the last couple of weeks and continuing from there. So really pleased to see that. And again, the huge majority of cases, of hospitalizations, of deaths in people who are not yet vaccinated. We can also, if you're interested, just to look at the overall vaccines here, citywide, 67% now of those over 18 have gotten at least a first dose, and about 61% of those over 18 have gotten both doses. So we continue to make some progress there, and you can continue exploring the dashboard as you like. But I did want to highlight that good news about the deaths. June 20th, the first date with no COVID deaths in Chicago since late September, 9 months ago. All right, let's go ahead and get into your questions. We can come off the dashboard. Okay, we're already getting things coming in. So Holly Marie on Twitter had asked, when in history has a virus ever mutated to become more deadly? Has that ever happened? And Holly, thanks for that question. I've seen a few different versions of this because there's this idea going around that never has a virus evolved to become more deadly. And unfortunately, that's just not true. There are multiple examples of viruses mutating. And to give some specifics, if we think about HIV or some of the hepatitis C strains, we've seen drug resistance evolve. We've seen changes that have made those viruses harder to fight. Also, if you think back, there are viruses that have been with us for a very long time that have evolved at different points, but in some cases have definitely been worse. You look at some of the bird flus in animals. You look at there's a disease in chickens, there's a disease in rabbits, where viruses can mutate to become more deadly. I think maybe the question here is related to this, what might happen with COVID? And if we think at the most basic level, a virus's goal, like any other living organism, the virus's goal is to survive, is to reproduce, it's to find a host, to reproduce, and to move on, to continue to live. And the thing that has been interesting about COVID, and one of the reasons why we've been following with the variants, both whether things are more infectious and whether they make people sicker or whether they're more deadly, those are not the same question, and they have different implications. Because clearly, if a virus is more infectious or more contagious, like that Alpha variant is, like that Delta variant looks to be even more infectious or contagious, that is a very good change for the virus, because if it's more contagious, if you don't need as much exposure to it for the host to become infected, if it hangs out in the airway more, like the Delta might, if it's more in the nose, if it's more easily able to spread, from the virus's standpoint, remember we talk about the agent, which is us, or the host, which is us, and how we change our behavior, how we get vaccinated. We talk about the pathogen or the virus and how it's changing, and then we talk about the environment. So where the pathogen is changing, the question of whether it is more deadly and whether that is the same as it being more infectious is important, because the thing is about COVID, it does a lot of spreading very early on, even before people have symptoms. And that's been one of the things that has made this virus particularly hard, because if you look at something like Ebola, contact tracing works very well for Ebola because nobody gets Ebola and doesn't know it, right? People don't start spreading Ebola before they have symptoms. COVID, people start spreading it before they have symptoms and very early on before they get critically ill. So from the virus's standpoint, it's already doing a really good job of spreading whether or not it's killing off the host. And there is this trade-off where if you had a virus that is very, very deadly, it often is less, it's not as contagious because if it's too good at killing the host, it doesn't actually have the opportunity to spread. This one is a good combination of, unfortunately, of both having the ability to spread, particularly before people get sick or before they know they have COVID, plus then making a lot of people really seriously ill. And so the hospitalizations, like in the UK, where the Delta has been driving the cases up a lot, there has been some increase certainly in hospitalizations, but not in proportion to the number of cases. So clearly more infectious, but not necessarily more dangerous in terms of hospitalizations, although we're definitely still learning about it. So I hope that helps. Okay. Texas teacher asks, can you please address the J&J booster issue? Every doctor has a different opinion. People are worried about Pfizer data with 64% efficacy, but J&J is similar and we are told no booster needed. Okay, so right now, there is no booster recommended for any of the 3 approved or authorized vaccines here in the US. So if you got 2 doses of Pfizer, you don't need a booster right now. If you got 2 doses of Moderna, you don't need a booster right now. And if you got 1 dose of J&J, you don't need a booster right now. All 3 of them have continued to show protection against all of the known variants. This has not been as true for some of the vaccines that are being used outside the US. So there are a couple of vaccines that were developed, for example, out of China, that have not been quite as effective against some of the variants, but those are not the ones that we are using here. And so there is not a recommendation for a booster. There is not a recommendation for, if you got 1 vaccine, to try to get another one, because the protection has continued to be good, especially for the severe outcomes, right, against hospitalization and death. And in fact, there was a nice paper that they looked at all of the US hospitalizations and COVID deaths. And in the month of May, for example, 99.2% of all COVID deaths in the US were in people who were not fully vaccinated, and 99.9% of the hospitalizations across the whole US for COVID were in people who were not fully vaccinated. The risks of vaccination are really low, and the benefits of vaccination are really overwhelming. So that's where we stand on that. Okay, what else have we got coming in? A couple of questions. All right, good. Questions about, I see Tom Dallas Johnson on Twitter, asking about why are COVID-19 vaccines linked to heart issues in teens and young adults. I see oh, this is the same person, it looks like, asking, tell about the teenagers who take the, oh, Tom Dallas Johnson says, tell why are the teenagers who take the COVID test having heart complications? Okay, so let's help get you sorted, Tom. So there are no links between the COVID test and any bad outcome of any kind ever, okay? COVID test, no link. I think what you're asking about here is, as we've continued to monitor the COVID vaccine, there has been, one of the things that we've been tracking is this question of what's called myocarditis, or inflammation of the heart muscle, or pericarditis, inflammation of the sac around the heart. And there's been some association that's been being followed for younger people, especially, and especially males. And so specifically, there was a MMWR, Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, that actually was published just today. So if you want to take a look, this is the main CDC journal, really summing up what the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, the ACIP, said about this when they met and looked at all the data. And what it says here, and what we can put the link in here, but it actually just came out today, so it's a very timely question. So the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices concluded the benefits of COVID-19 vaccination to individual persons and at the population level clearly outweighed the risks of myocarditis after vaccination. So what that means is that both at the individual level, meaning, I have a teenager, should I get my teenager vaccinated if I'm worried about myocarditis, and at the population level where we're worried about the potential spread of COVID, in both of those cases, the risk for the benefits of vaccine outweighed the risk. And they specifically recommend continued use of COVID-19 vaccines in all recommended age groups will prevent morbidity and mortality from COVID-19 that far exceed the number of cases of myocarditis expected. And you want to make sure that you're sharing this information, they say, with providers and pediatricians. And so if we put a few more numbers around this, because I think that can be a little bit odd. So first of all, what is myocarditis? Myocarditis, it's an inflammation of the heart muscle. It can present like a chest pain sometimes. In the cases where the few cases that they have seen potentially linked to vaccine, it has not been a serious illness. So there are 0 children that have died from vaccine-related myocarditis, whereas there have been between 300 and 400 kids that have died from COVID in the US. And then actually, where you look at the number of COVID cases, there have been more than 4 million cases of COVID in kids in the US, and there have been more than 7 million kids vaccinated against COVID. You compare kind of 300 to 400 COVID deaths versus 0 deaths for myocarditis. And where the comparison has actually been, college athletes. This was one of the things that really got doctors paying a lot of attention to the potential effects on the heart. So where college athletes had COVID-19, not the vaccine, the actual illness, there was a lot of follow-up to really understand what kind of impact there was, because obviously the teams were needing to make decisions about risks around COVID and whether athletes could play. And so the best studies on college athletes said the risk of a young person getting myocarditis after getting COVID-19 was about 1% to 3%. So that's about 1 in 50 college athletes who got COVID disease actually ended up getting a myocarditis. Now again, the great majority of them recover, but in comparison, the myocarditis or the pericarditis that there's been some concern for, you estimate there's about 16 cases in every million second doses. That's about 0.0016% or 1 in 62,000. So basically the risk, 1 in 62,000 of it being related to the vaccine, and about 1 in 50 related to having that problem if you actually have COVID disease. And so if you're concerned about myocarditis specifically, the risk is much higher with getting the disease than the vaccine, and the recommendation was to continue to vaccinate. And I certainly have continued to recommend vaccination for all people for whom it is eligible, which definitely includes children. Okay, we've got a few questions here wondering about whether the city of Chicago, like what's happening on the international scene. I see Kazim Kozivak on Facebook is saying, can the city of Chicago donate vaccines to Bosnia? We got another one in, can the city partner with this other city? So I would like nothing more than to be able to send unused vaccine from the city of Chicago internationally, because I remember really clearly, and I'm sure a lot of you do too, what it was like back a few months ago here, particularly when COVID was not doing that great and we didn't have enough vaccine, and that feeling of just, oh, we just need vaccine. And I'm concerned about, I'm very concerned about the fact that a lot of the world still does not have good access to vaccines, and that although, while that causes disease and death in those countries, it also really increases the risk for variants. However, the vaccines that we have here in Chicago and everywhere in the country are not the property of the city of Chicago. They've all been produced with federal funds, and we are required to use them in the way that we're allowed to, and we are not allowed to send them out of the country, as a jurisdiction. And we have asked. We've been talking to the CDC, and they have actually been working quite hard with the FDA and others around making sure that we can donate additional vaccine. And I've been having conversations about where we've got unused vaccine here. You know, we've been working to try to use it within Chicago, try to be able to share it with other jurisdictions. But I am hopeful that we will see much more go internationally. But we are not allowed, as the city of Chicago, to send our vaccine out of the U.S. So good question, and I've been asking the same one nationally. Kathy Bridges on Facebook says, my physical health is impaired by the lack of safety I feel. Not being able to walk and get fresh air. Please address that. Okay, Kathy, if your concern about feeling like you're not safe to walk and get fresh air is related to COVID, please let me reassure you that you absolutely can and should walk outside and get fresh air without a concern for getting COVID, particularly if you're walking by yourself. That has been a recommendation every single day of this entire pandemic. Your risk of being out of doors, especially if you're by yourself or only with people who are vaccinated, is virtually nothing. So it's not just your physical health, but your mental health is good for getting out and getting a walk and getting some fresh air. So please don't let concerns of COVID be what hold you back from that. Go out, get some fresh air, and thank you for the question. Jen Robles on Facebook is saying, do you need a third shot if you have chronic liver disease and an autoimmune disease? So there have been no recommendations at this point for a third shot at a population level. There have been some studies, specifically among people who are the most immunocompromised. For example, people who have had an organ transplant, where a lot of those folks, because their immune systems are so compromised, they still are recommended to get the vaccine, but in some of these people, they don't build up the antibodies and therefore don't have the protection. There have been some studies of doing a third dose of vaccine in those individuals, and some of them were able to develop some antibodies and protection. But what I would say to you is you definitely need to talk to your immunologist, who would know the details of your autoimmune disease. And broadly speaking, this has not been a recommendation yet outside of trials. Eventually, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, the same group that makes the recommendations for vaccine use, may make recommendations for booster shots. We could see recommendations down the line for people who, with particular underlying conditions, like we already have. We may see recommendations for people above a certain age or who live in a long-term care facility. But right now, there is no recommendation. Those studies are still ongoing, and I would encourage you to talk to your immunologist or your specialist if you are someone who has a severe immunocompromising disease. Bob Kulanda on Facebook. Why will CPS schools open for kids under 12? I work with little kids. So we've talked about this a lot, Bob. The basic answer is that even before we had a vaccine available, we saw that where you have appropriate COVID precautions in place, schools have not been sources of outbreaks. They have not really contributed to community spread significantly, and we've seen such negative impacts, particularly in the youngest children, where a lot of the social emotional learning, a lot of the needs where young children have struggled with trying to learn via Zoom. I have a niece who did all of her last year on Zoom in kindergarten, and I would not say that has been the most successful experiment. And my niece has lots of other resources, and we know that a lot of kids in Chicago don't. So the brief answer is that especially with vaccine being available for all adults, I am extremely confident about school being open in the fall and feeling really good about that. The risk also, it's not just about if vaccine is available. When our numbers are in good control, we see that also reflect across schools. So the chances are much lower that there is someone with COVID who is even in a school to begin with. Okay. Arizona Cards Lover on Twitter says, hey doc, why is graphene in the vax? Graphene is not in the vax. I'm not sure what that is a reference to. We have some information on our website about what specifically is in all of the vaccinations. So if you want to put in a little more detail about what graphene is or why you're asking about it, we can address it. But we've got the details basically, in, for example, those mRNA vaccines, that's the Pfizer and the Moderna. There's the actual instructions for your immune system, the mRNA. Everything else in there is just stabilizing that. It's just salts, sugars, and fats. So I hope that's helpful. Okay. Let's see. Kristen Korkowski on Facebook. When will masking on public transit be reevaluated? Any news? I don't have any news on that yet. Where you think about public transportation, that is something that has been set actually at the federal level. They regulate interstate transportation. We're talking about airplanes and trains. Well, we're also talking about the L here. You know, I've been taking the L every day for work, to and from work, and I'm seeing very, very good masking on there, which I've been pleased about. This is going to certainly continue to be a conversation. I think it depends on how we're doing. We are doing very well right now here in Chicago, but across the whole U.S., you know, cases actually are up a little bit, right? They're up 5 to 10% across the whole country, and there are a number of states, 2 or 3, that are likely to go back on our travel advisory, right? Where they are actually having significant surges, not just of cases, but of hospitalizations from COVID, and so recognizing that public transit is one of the spaces where people do tend to, mix more with people who would otherwise be outside their social networks or where there is some of that spread. That's why that's in place. So I don't know. There will continue to be national conversations about this as well as local. I don't expect it will be anytime very soon. As we hope, encourage people also. I think it helps encourage people back to public transportation. It's one way to help make it as safe as we can be. Okay, so there was a question here about travel, actually. So maybe there was a question about, okay, James says, I have a funeral to attend in Milwaukee. I need to bring my 80-year-old aunt. We are fully vaccinated. I'm not sure about the others. Should I be concerned for my aunt? Okay, James, like this is exactly a question that I think a lot of us are thinking about. And the good news is that if you are fully vaccinated and your aunt is fully vaccinated, broadly your protection is very good. And you're right, if you're not sure about all the others, you are going into a situation that could have some risk. I don't know your aunt. I don't know what underlying condition she has, but she's 80, so that is kind of a higher risk situation. If you're considering bringing her, obviously a funeral is an important, I'm guessing, this is someone she was probably close with. And so, I think my recommendation there, would broadly be to go if this is a decision. I also, when I am helping people make these decisions individually, I sometimes actually take a look at the area where someone's going to be traveling to have a sense of that. If you want to see a quick and easy way to do that, you can look on the CDC page, but the New York Times actually has, I think, a really nice page around this that gets updated daily. And so if we pull this up, like if you just go to NewYorkTimes.com, they've made this free, I believe, so you don't have to subscribe. It's a good national picture where you can see what's happening nationally. Can we pull this up actually so folks can take a look at it? And you can see, across the whole U.S., cases are up about 5%. But where that is, this sort of shows you the hot spots. You can see that we're seeing a lot of surging. Wisconsin looks really good up here. See, everything is in that lightest yellow, which means it's having fewer than 10 cases per day. And you can even go, here's Milwaukee, and you can say, at this point, they're just averaging, 19 cases a day. That's 2 cases per 100,000, and that's generally flat over the last 14 days. They're not having a big surge, would not have a major concern. If, though, you were like, should I go to a funeral that's down, in Springfield, Missouri here, I would have some worry because Missouri and Arkansas, parts of western Colorado, Nevada, are having some trouble. And so you can even go and you can see what's happening in states. So like Arkansas, for example, right, is up to 17 cases per 100,000 per day here. That's like Chicago being back up to more than 400 or 450 cases a day. This is back in, worrisome range. And you can see that in the last 14 days, Arkansas has gone up by 121% in its cases, right? And its hospitalizations are up 42%. So they are, you know, I would have some worry. Like, even if I were going to travel to Arkansas, I would be putting a mask on, right? Like, I think, especially if there were someone who I was particularly concerned about. But then if you look down here, and they re-rank the states every day based on where we're having trouble. So near the top is more problematic, right? Arkansas, Missouri, which are two of our least vaccinated states. And again, vaccine is protective. You know, Florida and Nevada are having a little bit of trouble too, up 63% in Florida. But then, you know, most of the country continues to do reasonably well here. We're seeing some big increases. Nebraska is up 137%, South Carolina 145%, but the numbers are still pretty low. And low numbers mean, you know, the chance of being exposed to somebody is still on the lower side. And, you know, way down here, like, you know, here's Illinois and Wisconsin right next to each other, both doing really well. Illinois is averaging 2 cases per 100,000, and actually Wisconsin's averaging 1, Chicago's averaging 1. So, you know, broadly speaking, we're doing, Illinois and Wisconsin are both doing very well. All of these states down here are doing great right now. So that's one of the things that I actually look at when I'm making recommendations and thinking about you know, masks or risk. And if you can also go and actually, like, if you click on one of these states, they'll even show you, like, within the state like here, if we click on Arkansas, you can see what's happening in Arkansas. And you can actually see, like, within Arkansas, these are the counties in Arkansas that are having trouble. And it can help you really understand risk at that more local level. So, okay, we can come back off the website, but I encourage you to explore this. I think they've done a really nice job. Okay. All right. Sousa Bella from Facebook. Are you safe training without a mask in a boxing class? So Sousa, if you are vaccinated, yes, broadly speaking. And hopefully if everybody in your boxing class has been vaccinated, please go ahead and box without masks. I don't have major concern. If you're not vaccinated, please wear a mask. And if not everybody is vaccinated, this is where you want to kind of have some conversations and make some decisions for yourself. But yes, you know, broadly, if everybody's got vaccines, the risk is low. And that's true for a boxing class. That's true for a choir. That's true for a picnic. That's true for whatever. If everybody who is eligible for vaccine, meaning adults, are vaccinated, the risk for everybody is very low. Sarah Garza from Facebook. Can you get the vaccine if you've been diagnosed with a PFO in the heart? Yes, you can. There are actually very, very few, like almost no situations in which the vaccine is not recommended. It tends to be if somebody has had a severe allergic reaction to one of the components of the vaccine, right? That would be the main thing. The concern with people who are immunocompromised has not been, by and large, that they should not get the vaccine. It's that in some people they get the vaccine and they don't get the full level of protection from it. But if you have a structural problem in your heart, like a PFO or a valve problem, yes, you can, and in fact should get the vaccine, because that's an underlying condition that would make it more likely for you to potentially have a problem if you were to develop COVID. So obviously, talk to your cardiologist, talk to your doctor, but broadly speaking, yes. Okay, let's see. So we've got a few, I'm trying to see what else is coming in here. Question here about being able to participate in trials. So if you're interested in actually being part of a COVID trial, there are multiple trials that are still going on. There's trials around vaccines, there's trials around people who have recovered from COVID and being able to follow up on them. There's trials about treatments, and the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, is where I would send you. So we can put a link in the chat, but if you just Google like NIH COVID vaccine trial, it'll bring you to the whole list, and there's actually a central spot. So if you're interested in actually being part of a trial, that's one good way to get that. Okay, so there's some people wondering about James Bosman on Twitter is saying, how many COVID vaccines are FDA approved? So let's break that apart a little bit. There are 3 COVID vaccines that have what is called emergency use authorization. So they have been authorized for use, and that is the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. There are no other vaccines at this point that have been submitted to the FDA for authorization. I expect that these vaccines will get what's called the full FDA approval soon. I would guess this will probably be in the maybe September range. And the difference between authorization and approval does not have anything to do with new studies or changes. It has to do with making sure that people have been followed for a long enough time. So when an emergency use authorization is granted, it's because we want to give people access to a drug or to a vaccine because there is some emergent reason to do so, like a pandemic, and you want to really make sure that you could make the vaccine available. So they were granted emergency use authorization once the trials had been done that showed that the vaccines were safe and effective. But to be able to get the full approval, the companies had to be able to submit longer-term data on the safety of the vaccine. And so after they were able to complete, for example, 6 months, that everybody in these trials had completed 6 months of follow-up, there had not been any other safety concerns, that met that timeline for follow-up. Also, the FDA does extra look at all of the vaccine manufacturing processes and really all steps of the vaccine process. It's the same thing that we do for any other vaccine. And so that data has already been submitted. Pfizer already has given the FDA everything that it needs, and I expect that it will have that full approval soon, and probably September. Typically, a full approval takes, it can take a year or more, but I think obviously in this case there's a lot of interest in that. It doesn't mean anything about vaccine availability. It does mean, while a vaccine is under emergency use authorization, or a drug, same thing, the company can't directly market the vaccine, and that's so once it has the full approval, you may start seeing more advertisements with direct marketing. But all of the scientific data is done, and it looks great. So they will get the full FDA approval. Okay. Question here, looks like Welly Michael is wondering, why should people who recovered from COVID get vaccinated in light of a Cleveland Clinic study and a few others that show some recovered people show long-term broad immunity? So Welly, we looked at this in some more detail last Thursday, I believe. I pulled 3 different studies that have started to really piece apart the fact that there is some immunity, and probably some longer lasting immunity when people have had natural recovery from COVID. But the longer term protection and the higher level of the antibodies actually come when people have had both recovery from natural COVID infection and a dose of the COVID vaccine. And so this is where I think some of the most promising, interesting data out of all the studies that I've seen have been some of these studies where they looked at bone marrow and others that suggested that if somebody recovered from COVID and has gotten vaccinated, there's a good chance they may have lifelong immunity, right? Never need a booster, have gotten both of those pieces. If you've recovered from COVID naturally, you certainly have some level of protection. If you've gotten vaccinated, you certainly have some level of protection. Between the two, vaccine has a stronger level of protection, but the combination of both is even better than that. And so there are a lot of studies going on about this. And the good news is, thank goodness there is at least some protection. And we've known that there's been at least kind of 3 months of protection. There probably is some that is longer lasting, and we're learning more about it every day. But the recommendation still definitely is to get the vaccine even if someone has recovered from COVID. And some of that has to do with variants. Like this was the big concern in Brazil when that P1 variant emerged. There were cities there that had been hit so hard that they actually thought they might have gotten to like natural herd immunity because so much of the city had been diagnosed with COVID. And then when they had a variant emerge, a lot of those people got COVID again. And so really recognizing that with variants, you want to have, ideally, I think, some of the protection that comes with the vaccine as well. Stacy Betts just got my shot today. Woohoo! Thank you, Stacy Betts. Good job. You are one of about 4,500 or 5,000 vaccines that we're still giving every day here in Chicago. And thanks for getting vaccinated and telling us. Lee Clay on Facebook. What are the chances of anyone fully vaccinated catching the Delta variant? So this is where, again, luckily the vaccines have continued to perform well. And we shared some data. Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J have now put some data out showing that their vaccines do remain protective against the Delta variant, though you lose a little bit. So Pfizer, for example, what we saw was that in this big study in the UK, after one dose of the Pfizer vaccine, remember you need 2 doses, after 1 dose of the Pfizer vaccine, not for the Delta variant, for the Alpha variant, you were about 50-ish% protected. And then against the Delta variant, if you'd only had 1 dose, it only fell to about 39% protected, I think. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but like 35 to 40% protected, which is not well protected. But after 2 doses of that mRNA, that Pfizer vaccine, even against the Delta variant, it fell from about 93% protected to about 88% protected. And so 88% protected is still very, very good. And then importantly, the protection against hospitalization and death remains really good. Remember what I said right up at the top? You know, we've seen here across the whole country, just in May, 99% of those hospitalizations and deaths in people who are not vaccinated. And here in Chicago, going all the way back to January, when vaccines were kind of first fully available, 97% plus of the people living here in Chicago who have been hospitalized or who have died from COVID since then, people who are not fully vaccinated. And that has remained true even as variants have emerged. So, luckily at this point, the vaccines continue to perform well, especially for those severe outcomes against COVID. So I hope that helps. All right, we are at time. I want to just note a couple of updates here. Someone was wondering about if the United Center is still open. It is not, and we are, as we've been backing off on some of these larger mass vaccination sites, we continue to really be out in the community. We've got 40 plus events. We're at CTA stations, we're at churches, we were at softball games this last weekend, we've been at festivals, and then really trying to get vaccine into places where people go regularly. So you can go to chicago.gov/vaxcalendar if you want to see where the vaccine bus is and some of the places where we'll be this coming week. I also just wanted to note that our Protect Chicago Music Series, the next concert is coming up. Protect Chicago Music Series, remember, these are our concerts that are available exclusively for people who are fully vaccinated. They're free. They're a thank you back to Chicago around vaccine. And when people get vaccinated, they get free tickets to the concert. And then we also make tickets available for people who have already chosen to get vaccines. Same thing with Lollapalooza, right? We gave away tickets, but then we had tickets available, through an online system. I know more people wanted them than got them, but for people who had already been vaccinated. So our next Protect Chicago Music Series is featuring the house music DJ collective, The Chosen Few, which is a well-known DJ collective here in Chicago. The show is going to be at Kennedy King College campus on August 28th in the afternoon. It'll be open only to Chicago residents 18 and up who are fully vaccinated by August 14th. So you need to register at chicago.gov/PCMS. That's chicago.gov Protect Chicago Music Series, PCMS, to get your ticket. And you can go ahead and sign up on there if you're already vaccinated and you want a chance to be able to get a ticket, or if you want to see how to get a vaccine. That's our next one coming up. They're available on a first come, first serve basis. So chicago.gov/PCMS. And the last thing I wanted to note is that the CDPH, today is actually our first day for our smaller scale, sort of more ongoing immunization clinic. We're going to have a few of these that are open, as we're bringing some of these larger mass vaccination sites down. Our Greater Lawn Immunization Clinic, which is at 4150 West 55th Street, is open today. We've got Pfizer and J&J available. We'll be open Monday through Friday there. You can make an appointment. You can also walk in, and we'll be sharing more of this as time goes on. But you can still walk into a pharmacy, you can still walk in, you can make appointments at your doctor's office, and we continue to have a lot of opportunities here across Chicago. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will be back on Thursday. We are also going to talk on Thursday a little more about the origins of COVID, because that's another thing people have been asking about. Are we, what do you think about this theory with the lab in China versus animals? That's a larger conversation. So we'll plan to hit on that a little bit on Thursday, as well as talk a little bit about some of the other response work that we're doing. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you back on Thursday.